I inherited my uncle's house last year after he passed unexpectedly. It's a single-story place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Not the kind of setting you'd expect to be terrifying. I moved in 2 months later, figuring I'd slowly make it my own. The garage was attached to the house, and honestly, it was the messiest part of the property. Boxes piled up everywhere, tools scattered around, shelves stacked with decades of forgotten junk. I didn't think much of it. It was just old stuff. But there was this smell, not overpowering, just faint, damp, metallic almost. I thought maybe a pipe had rusted or an old paint can leaked somewhere. One Saturday, I decided to finally clean it out. I remember I had the garage door open, sunlight pouring in, dust dancing in the air. I started sweeping around the edges, pulling out boxes, when my broom caught on something wedged deep in the corner behind a stack of wood planks. It was a key, a small, old-fashioned brass key, caked with dust and rust, cold in my hand when I picked it up. I assumed it belonged to one of the old storage cabinets, but when I tried it on all the obvious locks in the garage, nothing worked. That night, I lay in bed thinking about it. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I woke up to this faint sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape like metal against stone. I sat up listening. It was coming from the garage. I wanted to tell myself it was just pipes settling or the water heater cycling, but the sound had this strange rhythm to it. 3 slow scrapes, then silence, then 2 short ones. When I got up the next morning, my dog Max refused to go near the garage door. Normally, he'd follow me everywhere, but he sat in the hallway whining softly, tail low. I told myself I was overthinking it. Until that evening, when I heard the knocking. Soft, deliberate, coming from directly beneath the concrete floor. By the 3rd night, I couldn't pretend it was nothing anymore. The knocking had become louder and heavier, like someone was hitting the underside of the garage floor with a fist. I pulled out the blueprints I'd gotten from the city office when I signed the paperwork. According to them, the house didn't have a basement. There wasn't supposed to be anything beneath the garage except compacted earth. So why did it sound hollow when I stomped on the floor? The next night, I set up my phone on a box and hit record. I sat in the living room, volume cranked high, waiting. Around 2:13 a.m. it started. 3 long scrapes, 2 short, then silence. When I played the recording back, though, there was something else. Beneath the scraping, buried in the static, there was this voice. A whisper. It said my name. I froze. Replay. Louder this time. No mistake. It said my name. After that, I couldn't sleep. Every tiny creak, every gust of wind outside, every distant hum of the fridge set my nerves on edge. Max stopped eating and would bark at the garage door, his hackles raised, until his throat went hoarse. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep the door locked and pretend it wasn't happening. But the smell, that damp metallic rot, grew stronger every single night. By the end of the week, I snapped. I had to know what was under there. I bought a hammer drill. The next night, I locked Max in the bedroom, rolled up my sleeves, and started boring into the concrete. About 2 inches down, the drill bit slipped through into empty air. There was a void beneath my garage floor. I cleared away the dust and rubble until I found it. A hatch. Steel. Cold. Perfectly flush with the rest of the slab. No handle. No markings. But there was a small circular keyhole. I already knew what would fit. My hands were shaking as I slid the brass key in. Click. The hatch gave a low groan as I pulled it open, stale air rushing up from the darkness below. The smell hit me immediately. Damp stone, rust, and something organic. There was a narrow staircase. I shined my flashlight down. The walls weren't brick or concrete. They were smooth metal, bolted plates, running deep beneath the house. Every instinct told me to close it, to leave, to call someone. But I couldn't. I started down, 1 step at a time, the old metal groaning under my weight. Then I heard it. Whisper coming from somewhere deep below. I froze, listening. It said, lower. Max started barking upstairs, frantic, paws scratching at the garage door above me, and then the hatch slammed shut. Darkness swallowed me. My flashlight flickered once, then went dead. The whispering stopped, and in the silence, something started. Breathing, loud, wet, right behind me. I haven't found a way out, and I don't think I'm alone down here. I work the night shift at a small auto repair shop just off the highway. Most nights are quiet, and I usually have a few hours to myself. After finishing up the last of the day's work, I keep the big garage door half open to let in some air, and the hum of distant traffic is the only real sound. It was close to midnight when I heard an engine outside. A black sedan pulled slowly into the garage, headlights cutting across the dimly lit space. The car rolled to a stop near the center, idling softly. I waited for the driver to get out, but nobody moved. I walked around to the driver's side and knocked on the window, but there was no response. The glass was fogged up from the inside, and that's when I noticed something strange. There were handprints on the inside of the windshield, long smeared streaks, as if someone had dragged their palms downward in desperation. I leaned closer, trying to see through the fog. The driver's seat looked empty, but the faint shape of something, or someone, seemed to be slumped low in the shadows. Before I could decide whether to open the door, the engine shut off by itself. The sudden silence hit me harder than I expected. The hum of the lights overhead felt deafening now, and I realized I was holding my breath. Then I heard it. A faint sound, muffled and steady. Someone was breathing inside the car. I grabbed the handle and slowly pulled the driver's door open. The seat was empty. I checked the back seat, shining my flashlight around. Nothing. Not a jacket, not a bag, nothing at all. The interior looked spotless, like it had just been detailed. But the breathing didn't stop. It was louder now, deep and wet, coming from somewhere else. I stepped back, scanning the shop, trying to figure out where it was coming from. Then I realized the sound wasn't coming from inside the cabin. It was coming from under the hood. I hesitated, hand hovering over the latch. The hood felt warm, and the faint vibrations against my palm matched the rhythm of the breathing. I finally popped it open. My flashlight beam hit the inside of the engine bay. It was empty. No engine, no wiring, no hoses. Nothing. But the metal frame was vibrating, shuddering softly, as if something inside the car was alive and straining against the chassis. I slammed the hood shut and stumbled back, heart pounding. That's when the headlights flickered on by themselves. The car's dashboard lights flared to life, and the radio crackled loudly with static. A voice whispered through the speakers, low and broken. It said, "Stay." I pulled the keys from the ignition, but the dashboard stayed lit. The headlights grew brighter, casting sharp beams of white light that washed across the shop walls. The breathing came back, louder than before, but now it was no longer coming from the car. It was beneath me. The floor vibrated under my boots, tools rattled on the shelves, and a wrench clattered to the ground. I backed away slowly, every muscle in my body locked tight. Suddenly, the car jolted forward, tires screeching against the concrete, and slammed into the wall with a violent crash. The noise stopped. The headlights died, and the shop fell into complete silence. I stood, frozen, chest heaving, trying to process what had just happened. Then, from directly behind me, I heard it, a whisper. It said my name. I turned, expecting to see someone there. But the garage was empty. At least, I think it was. I inherited my father's rural property after he passed away last year. Most of it was in good shape, but the detached garage behind the house was in rough condition. According to the neighbors, my father hadn't used it in almost 15 years, and I could see why when I finally managed to pry the door open. The air was thick and stale, heavy with dust, and cobwebs stretched across the ceiling like nets. It felt like no one had stepped inside for decades. I spent the first few days clearing out old tools, broken shelves, and piles of junk. It was going well until I noticed a smell in the far back corner. At first, I thought something had crawled in and died, maybe a raccoon or a stray cat. I moved the workbench away from the wall, expecting to find a carcass, but there was nothing. I scrubbed the walls, sprayed bleach, and even pulled up the floor tiles near the corner. Still, the smell stayed, sharp, rotten, metallic. That night, while standing in the garage with the lights off, I listened carefully. I don't know why I did it. Maybe curiosity, maybe something deeper. That's when I heard it. A soft, deliberate knock. It was coming from behind the wall. I couldn't stop thinking about the knocking. The next morning, I grabbed a hammer and started tapping along the back wall, listening carefully. Most of it sounded solid, but when I reached the far right corner, the tone changed completely. Its voice sounded hollow. I pressed my ear against the surface and held my breath. There was nothing at first, only silence. But then, I heard a faint creak from inside, like shifting weight on old wood. I pried off the paneling piece by piece, careful not to make too much noise, until I uncovered a small hidden passage about 2 feet wide. A wave of cold, stagnant air rushed out, carrying the same metallic smell, only stronger now. I grabbed a flashlight and shined it inside. The narrow walls were covered in deep scratches, long and uneven, gouged straight into the wood. They weren't the kind you'd make with tools. They looked like fingernail marks. A bare light bulb hung from the ceiling just a few feet in, attached to a frayed cord. I flipped the switch by the doorway, but the bulb didn't come on. The further I shined the flashlight, the more I noticed how the dust on the floor had been disturbed, as though someone had walked through recently. I crouched down, carefully, stepping into the narrow passage, the air cold and damp against my skin. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the knocking stopped completely. The silence was so heavy it pressed against my ears, like the air itself didn't want me there. Then something shifted further down the passage. Something was waiting. I followed the passage deeper until it opened into a small, windowless room. It wasn't on any of the house's blueprints, but the concrete floor and steel-reinforced walls told me it had been built deliberately. In the center sat a single wooden chair, old and splintered, bolted directly into the ground. The floor around it was covered in deep scratches, grooves carved into the concrete itself. I ran my fingers along one of them. The edges were jagged and uneven, as if they'd been made by bare hands tearing at the stone. On the far side of the room stood a heavy steel door, sealed tight with 3 massive bolts. I stepped closer, flashlight trembling in my hand, and that's when I heard it. A whisper. It came from behind the door, so faint at first that I thought I imagined it. I leaned closer. The whisper became clearer, though I couldn't understand the words. It was soft, broken, like someone repeating the same phrase over and over. I reached out without thinking, fingertips brushing the cold metal handle. The moment I touched it, the entire door shuddered violently. The sound exploded in the silence, and the bare light bulb overhead flickered to life for the first time, casting harsh shadows that danced along the walls. Then came the pounding, heavy, slow, measured. Something on the other side was trying to get out. I ran, crawling back through the narrow passage, my flashlight beam jerking wildly across the scratched walls. Just as I reached the main garage, the knocking returned behind me, loud and frantic now, hammering against the steel door. I slammed the panel shut and backed away, heart racing. The garage was silent again, but I could still smell the damp, metallic air, and deep within the wall, something is still knocking. I work as a night security guard for a private corporate parking garage downtown. It's not the most exciting job, but the pay is decent, and usually, the nights are quiet. Most employees leave by 8, and after that, the place empties out completely. The garage has 4 main levels, B1 through B3, plus an additional restricted floor, B2, that's been sealed off since before I started working here. According to the other guards, there was a partial collapse years ago, so management had it permanently closed. 2 months into the job, I started noticing something strange on the security cameras. Every night, just after 2:30 a.m., the elevator would descend to level B2, stop for a few seconds, and then return to the main lobby. At first, I thought it was a glitch in the system. Old wiring, faulty programming. Nothing unusual, but the timing never changed. Every single night, the elevator doors opened on a level that had been sealed for over a decade. One Friday night, curiosity got the better of me. I left the security office and took the elevator down to B1, deciding to check it out myself. The stairwell leading to B2 was blocked by a heavy steel door bolted shut, just as I expected. I stood there for a moment, listening. The air was cold and damp, heavy with the faint smell of oil and concrete dust. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate. They were coming from the stairwell behind the sealed door. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about level B2, toy. Every shift, I watched the monitors carefully, waiting for the elevator to make its nightly descent. Sure enough, at exactly 2:30 a.m., the doors opened on B2 again. The camera inside the elevator showed an empty car, yet the panel lit up as if someone had pressed the button. I switched to the hallway feed outside B2. It was completely dark. The motion sensors didn't detect a thing. Then, late one night, I noticed something new. The audio feed from the B2 hallway started picking up sound. Faint whispers. I turned the volume up, straining to make out words, but it wasn't in any language I understood. I left the office and went down to the stairwell. Again, flashlight in hand. The closer I got to the door leading to B2, the colder the air became. Moisture clung to the concrete walls, and my breath came out in short, white clouds. I pressed my ear against the steel door, holding my breath. At first, there was nothing. Then came 3 sharp knocks from the other side. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The whispering stopped completely, and the silence that followed felt heavier than the air itself. Spent the next few days digging through city records and old blueprints of the garage. That's when I found something that made no sense at all. Level B2 wasn't supposed to exist. The original plans showed only 3 floors, B1, B3, and the ground-level lobby. There was no mention of B2 anywhere, yet every night, at the exact same time, the elevator went there. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. On my next shift, I waited until 2:30 a.m. and followed the elevator down. When it stopped at B2, the doors refused to open, so I forced them apart with my hands. Cold air rushed out, sharp and biting against my skin. The hallway beyond was pitch black, but my flashlight revealed faint tire marks on the concrete, leading deeper into the level. I stepped inside. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, I heard an engine idling softly, the sound muffled but steady. I followed it, every step echoing into the shadows, until I found the source. A single car sat parked in the far corner, an old, dark blue sedan coated in dust thick enough to write on. I checked the plates against the garage system, but no vehicle with that registration had ever entered the building. Before I could process what I was seeing, the headlights blazed to life, the engine roared, and behind me, the elevator doors slammed shut. When my Uncle Raymond passed away, his small 2-story house in the suburbs was left to me in his will. I had barely visited him over the years, but I remembered spending summers here as a kid. The house always had a quiet, unsettling feeling, but I chalked it up to childhood imagination. Now, standing in the driveway with the keys in my hand, I told myself it was just a house like any other. The first thing I wanted to tackle was the garage. Uncle Raymond had used it more for storage than for parking. The heavy metal door screeched as I lifted it open, revealing a dim, dusty space cluttered with old furniture, cardboard boxes, rusted tools, and piles of newspapers stacked chest-high. The air inside was damp and sour, like mold trapped for years. I spent the entire afternoon dragging out boxes and sweeping the floor, tossing junk into a growing trash pile. That was when I noticed something strange. In the far right corner, partially hidden under a stack of paint cans, the concrete floor looked slightly different. The slab was cracked around the edges, and when I tapped it with the end of a broom handle, it didn't sound solid, it sounded hollow. I crouched down and brushed away the dirt, revealing a rectangular outline like the edges of a trapdoor sealed into the ground. There was no handle, no hinges, nothing that suggested it was meant to be opened. Later that night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about that hollow patch. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but around midnight, I heard something that pulled me upright in bed. It was faint, but I was sure of it. 3 slow, muffled knocks. They came from the direction of the garage. I told myself it was probably the pipes or the house settling, but deep down, I wasn't convinced. The next morning, I decided to investigate the garage again. Sunlight spilled in through the open door, but it didn't make me feel safer. I walked straight to the hollow patch and knelt down, pressing my ear to the concrete. At first there was only silence, and I almost laughed at myself. Then I heard it, a faint, irregular scraping sound, like something sharp dragging across stone. I jerked back and stood up, heart pounding. To distract myself, I started going through my uncle's old workbench. Most of it was cluttered with rusted tools and dried paintbrushes, but tucked behind a loose drawer panel, I found something hidden. Inside was a small stack of Polaroid photos held together with a rubber band. I hesitated before looking at them. The first few were blurry shots of the garage itself, taken from different angles at night. The last one made my stomach drop. It showed the hollow patch in the floor, freshly wet, with long, dark stains smeared across the concrete. Underneath the photos, I found a folded piece of paper with my uncle's handwriting. The note was short and shaky. Don't open it. If it knocks, do not answer. Feed it once a month. I froze, staring at the note for what felt like an eternity. Feed it? That night, I tried to sleep but couldn't. Every creak of the house put me on edge. Around 2 in the morning, the faint scraping returned, louder this time, followed by soft dragging sounds beneath the garage floor. I grabbed a flashlight and crept halfway down the stairs before stopping myself. Some part of me didn't want to know, but another part needed answers. By the third night, the sounds were constant. Slow, deliberate scraping, soft dragging, and, now a low rhythmic knocking, always in sets of 3. I could barely eat, barely sleep. My chest felt tight, and my hands shook whenever I walked past the garage door. I gave in. I grabbed a crowbar from the workbench and jammed it into the cracked edge of the hollow patch. The concrete resisted at first, but after several minutes of prying, it shifted slightly with a groan. Cold, damp air hissed from the gap, carrying a foul, metallic stench. My stomach lurched, but I kept going until the slab lifted enough to slide it aside. Below was a narrow opening, barely large enough to crawl through, leading into darkness. A wooden ladder descended into a cramped chamber lined with dirt walls. The air was wet and heavy, and the beam from my flashlight shook in my trembling hand. At the bottom, I found what looked like a small makeshift room. There were scraps of old blankets, empty tin cans, and something that looked disturbingly like claw marks etched deep into the packed earth walls. Then I saw it. In the far corner, hunched and unmoving, was something covered with a filthy sheet. I thought it was a pile of rags until I saw the sheet rise and fall slightly, like breathing. I stumbled backward, kicking over a can, and the sound echoed through the cramped chamber. The breathing stopped. Silence. Then, in a hoarse, rasping voice, it whispered my name. I scrambled up the ladder, slammed the slab shut, and backed away until I hit the wall. The knocking started again almost immediately, harder this time, shaking the floor beneath me. That was 3 nights ago. I haven't gone back into the garage since. But last night, I woke to the sound of something scratching, not under the floor this time, but at the door to my bedroom.